golden sunset bathed the luxurious rooftops of Banana Island, Lagos, in a warm, honeyed light. At the heart of it stood the palatial estate of the Mustapha family, a symbol of power, wealth, and legacy built on shimmering bars of gold. Inside the high-walled compound, nestled between manicured gardens and water fountains, lived the girl who had inherited it all, yet never acted like she did. Jewellisa Mustapha, 22, daughter of Africa's gold billionaire Dr. Lenith Mustapha and the ageless beauty Madame Josephine Mustapha, was the kind of young woman who turned heads effortlessly. But it wasn't just her beauty, though that alone could silence a room. Her rich, ebony skin glowed like sun-drenched cocoa, her soft curls often wrapped in silk scarves, and her walk, graceful and purposeful, spoke of quiet confidence. What made Jewellisa unforgettable was how she carried all her privilege with humility. She was loved by all, from the chauffeur to the gardener, because she treated everyone with the same kindness she gave her parents. It was her last day in Lagos before flying to London for her master's degree, and though the house buzzed with excitement and last-minute packing, a quiet heaviness lingered in the air. "Jewy," her mother called out from the grand foyer, descending the marble staircase in a gold-embroidered caftan. She was the definition of poise, tall, elegant, and glowing. "Are you sure you've packed everything? The jet is prepped, and your father's already pacing in the living room." Jewellisa emerged from her bedroom wearing wide-leg pants and a white blouse. Her luggage was neatly arranged behind her. "Triple-checked, Mum. I'm all set." Josephine reached her daughter and cupped her face gently. "I know you're going to do brilliantly, but London is London. Just promise me you'll be careful." Jewellisa smiled. "I will." Just then, her father appeared, broad-shouldered, dignified, and intense. Dr. Lenith Mustapha rarely showed emotion, but today his stern face softened. His agbada, cream-colored and richly detailed, swayed as he walked toward his daughter. "You've always made me proud, Jewel," he said, his voice deep and deliberate. "Go out there, study hard, and remember, no distractions. I won't let you down, Baba. And stay away from men." Jewellisa blinked, caught slightly off guard. "Men?" He nodded. "They'll come like bees to honey. You're young, smart, and beautiful. Don't let anyone derail you." She laughed softly. "I'll be too busy studying to notice anyone." He narrowed his eyes slightly, then pulled her into a rare embrace. "Good. I trust you. You're not just my daughter. You're my successor." She hugged him back, deeply aware of the weight those words carried. Though he didn't say it aloud, Jewellisa knew there was more behind his warning. All her life she'd heard whispers, cautionary tales, tension-filled conversations about one family in particular, the Khalifa Empire. They were the Mustapha's rivals, equally rich, equally powerful, and in charge of Nigeria's petroleum and gas empire. Though the name wasn't often mentioned in the household, the discomfort it brought when it surfaced was unmistakable. Jewellisa had never asked for details. She just knew. Stay far away from the Khalifas. By evening, 3 luxury black SUVs rolled toward the private hangar at Murtala Mohammed Airport. Inside the jet, Jewellisa sat by the window, watching Lagos shrink beneath her. A bittersweet feeling crept over her chest. She was leaving behind her city, her comfort, and the only life she had ever known. But she wasn't afraid. She was ready. London welcomed her with gray skies and chilly air. The city was a contrast to Lagos in every way, quieter, colder, and more structured. Her apartment in South Kensington was cozy but elegant, just like her. No staff, no luxuries, just space for her to think, grow, and prepare. Her university was world-renowned, filled with students from every continent, all buzzing with ideas and ambition. Jewellisa blended in, intentionally keeping her profile low. She dressed simply, carried herself with grace, and kept her head down. Her father had sent her to learn, not to shine, and she took that seriously. What shocked many who met her was her humility. Jewellisa didn't flaunt her last name. She didn't talk about her father's empire, nor did she attend extravagant social events like many international students from wealthy homes. She walked to school. She made her own meals. She answered questions with calm precision and left class quietly when it ended. The only place where she let her guard fully down was the library. There, between worn-out encyclopedias and glass walls, she found peace. The library was her sanctuary. She'd spend hours there after class, poring over business case studies, historical records of trade empires, gold mining economies, and anything that would prepare her to become the future CEO of Mustapha Gold Holdings. And it was there, between silence and shelves, that she was first seen by him. Jason was in his final year of a PhD in engineering and petroleum systems. At 28, he was calm, brilliant, and disarmingly handsome, with dark chocolate skin, a perfectly trimmed beard, and an athletic build. Jason exuded a presence that drew attention even when he didn't try, but he was always quiet, always in his zone. Until Jewellisa walked in. She came to the same corner every day, always with a laptop and a bottle of water, always reading with intense focus. Her presence was subtle but magnetic. She never looked around, never glanced up. But Jason noticed her. He noticed her the way an artist notices light falling on a face. He began timing his library sessions around hers, though he'd never admit it. She fascinated him. Her beauty, yes, but also her discipline. She wasn't there for show, she was there for purpose. For 3 weeks, their paths crossed in complete silence. Until one Thursday evening, fate cracked the silence open. Jewellisa glanced up mid-sentence from her book, feeling something. And there he was, Jason, looking straight at her. Their eyes locked. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. A rush of heat crept up her neck. She looked away quickly, then slowly turned back to her notes, her heart strangely unsteady. Jason pretended to return to his own study, but his mind didn't move an inch from her. The next few days, they saw each other more often, on campus paths, in coffee shops, at the station, and every time there was a lingering glance, a half smile, a tension growing between them, like something waiting to be named. Then came the bump. It was Saturday, and Jewellisa had planned brunch with 2 of her Nigerian girlfriends. Dressed in wide-legged trousers and a crop sweater, she stepped out of her apartment building in a hurry and walked straight into someone. Her phone slipped, but a strong hand caught it. She began, then stopped. Jason. He smiled, holding her phone out. You live here? She blinked. Yeah, you too? 3rd floor, he said with a chuckle. Small world. Very, she replied. I'm Jason, he added, offering his hand. Jewellisa. Their first words, their first smile. And in the air between them, something quietly sparked. She took her phone, said goodbye, and walked toward her Uber. Jason stood watching her, just a little longer than necessary. The next morning, as she stepped out, he was waiting in his sleek black sedan. Heading to class? He asked. Yes, she said slowly, unsure if it was coincidence. I am too. Would you mind some company? Her hesitation lasted only a second. Sure. She climbed in. And just like that, the silence between them was broken. Unknowingly, the girl of gold and the boy of petroleum were stepping into something they could never have imagined. London's skyline blinked to life as the afternoon gave way to dusk. The city was a blend of old charm and modern ambition, just like her. Jewellisa walked through the courtyard of her university, pulling her coat tighter around her. It was cold, but not unbearably so. The kind of cold that nipped at your fingers, but let your mind stay sharp. She liked that. It kept her focused. She had just left her final lecture for the day and was making her way to the library when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Trying to beat me to our spot again? She turned to see Jason holding 2 cups of coffee. You assumed I'd go to the library, she teased. I know you, he said, handing her one of the cups. Their fingers brushed lightly, and for a moment, Jewellisa looked down, hiding the smile tugging at the corners of her lips. They walked in together, weaving through the long marble halls. The library's scent, books and quiet, wrapped around her like a blanket. Their table in the far right corner was still free, just like always. As they settled into their seats, Jason placed a small notebook between them, filled with equations and annotated diagrams. "Need help with business modeling?" he asked. Desperately. He leaned closer. "Let's start from the basics." It began with study sessions, but even those had a rhythm. She'd lean in when she didn't understand something, and he'd watch the way her eyebrows furrowed when she concentrated. He admired her mind, her discipline. Jewellisa wasn't one of those girls who waited for someone to explain everything. She tried hard first, then asked questions with humility and precision. It made Jason respect her even more. Their conversations, once strictly academic, slowly widened. They spoke about London life, differences in Nigerian and UK culture, their favorite music, and what they missed most about home. But there were things they both avoided: last names, parents, legacies. One evening after a particularly long session, Jason closed his laptop and leaned back. "What made you choose this program?" he asked. Jewellisa tucked her hair behind her ear, her expression softening. "My dad owns a gold business, massive. I want to understand trade from every angle, not just the glamorous parts. I want to lead someday." Jason studied her face carefully. "You don't carry yourself like someone born into all that." "I don't want it to define me," she said, shrugging. "What about you? Why petroleum systems?" There was a pause. Jason sat up straighter, then looked down briefly. "Family business, too. My father runs one of the biggest petroleum companies in Nigeria." Jewellisa nodded slowly. "Do you work with him?" "Not exactly." His voice tightened. "We're not close." She tilted her head. "Sorry, I didn't mean to pry." "No, it's fine," he said, his voice calm but clipped. "He's alive, very much so. Just the type of man who thinks perfection is the only acceptable standard. Growing up, I was always trying to meet his expectations. Never quite did." Jewellisa didn't push further. She just reached for her pen, offering a gentle, understanding smile. "I get it," she said. "Sometimes we carry weight our parents don't even realize." Jason looked at her differently in that moment. He saw not just beauty, but a woman who understood him in a way few ever had. Their bond deepened in the quiet corners of campus life. Mornings in his car turned into full rides with music and warm croissants. Lunch breaks often ended with them sharing pastries under the tall trees near the business block. Jewellisa found herself laughing more around him, talking more. She didn't feel like she had to be perfect. Jason saw her as she was, not a Mustapha, just Jewellisa. One rainy Tuesday, as they sat in their usual library spot, she rested her cheek on her palm and watched him explain a complex model on the board they used to study. "You're brilliant," she said suddenly, half in awe. He chuckled. "I try." "No, seriously, you're like a real-life spreadsheet genius." "Well, if this petroleum thing fails, I'll become a tutor and charge in dollars." She giggled. The sound made him pause for a second. Her laughter had become his favorite soundtrack. After the study session, they walked back to their apartment building, side by side, umbrellas overhead. When they reached the entrance, Jason hesitated. "Want to come upstairs?" he asked. "I made jollof." Jewellisa raised a brow. "You cook?" "I'm Nigerian, aren't I?" he teased. "And before you judge, my jollof wins awards." She laughed. "All right, I'm curious." His apartment was tidy, minimal, and surprisingly warm. She liked that it wasn't overly designed or expensive looking. It reflected his personality, quiet, put together, and private. They ate while music played low in the background. She complimented the food repeatedly, and he pretended to act humble. After dinner, they talked for hours about their favorite childhood memories, their dreams, their regrets. Still, no last names. Still, no family histories. As the night drew to a close, he walked her to her door. "Thanks for the food," she said softly. "Thanks for the company," he replied. There was a long pause. Neither of them moved. "Good night, Jason." "Good night, Jewellisa." The following week, a bouquet of blush roses appeared at her door with a note. "To the girl who makes Tuesday nights feel like Christmas." Her heart fluttered. She didn't need to guess who sent it. There was something about routine that made life in London feel less foreign. For Jewellisa, it was the steady rhythm of classes, the quiet walks from lectures to the library, and most importantly, the shared silences with Jason. What began as occasional study sessions turned into near-daily habits. Mornings with him, afternoons with him, evenings that began with books and ended with laughter. They had slowly, without realizing it, become each other's constants. Their apartment building had balconies that overlooked a quiet inner courtyard, where string lights hung above bare branches, and the city's noise softened into a hum. Jewellisa often found herself there in the evenings, sometimes reading, sometimes sipping tea. Jason would show up without warning, sometimes with snacks, other times with just his presence. One cold evening, he brought her roasted cashews and a flask of Zobo. She raised a brow when he handed it over. "What?" he asked, grinning. "I saw it in a Nigerian store. Thought you might be homesick." She smiled. "I am a little." They sat close that night, their arms occasionally brushing. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But it was more than friendship. There was a quiet intimacy to it, as if both were afraid to say too much and lose the magic of not knowing everything. The shift came one Thursday. They had just finished a long day of lectures and decided to grab dinner at a cozy Nigerian restaurant tucked in the heart of East London. It wasn't glamorous: plastic chairs, red checkered tablecloths, and Afrobeats humming from a speaker mounted on the wall. But it felt like home. The air was thick with the scent of jollof rice, suya, and fried plantain. Comfort food, healing food. They ordered generously: suya, egusi soup, goat meat, puff, and a bottle of malt each. Their laughter came easily, and for a while they forgot they were far from home. As the waiter cleared their plates, they both reached for their puff at the same time, fingers brushing. Jewellisa chuckled softly, leaning back in her seat. Then after a moment of quiet, she asked gently, "Why are you always so quiet? I mean, you're kind, incredibly smart, but you hold back. Why?" Jason didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at the puff between his fingers, like it suddenly held the answer. Then he placed it back on the plate slowly, laced his fingers together and said, "Because most people who came close to me only did so to get something." Jewellisa's eyes lifted, her body still. "My father is the kind of man people fear and respect. Powerful, controlling. He raised me to think emotions were a weakness. That being soft meant being stepped on. So I built walls, spoke less, watched more." She didn't interrupt. Jason continued, his voice steady but quiet. "I learned early that people came close to me not because they cared, but because of what they could get: money, power, proximity. Nobody really saw me, just the surname, so I stopped trying." Jewellisa's heart ached at the rawness of his words. "I told myself that I would stop chasing affection, stop bending to be understood, and instead, I'd find my own peace, my own love, and it would come to me, without me trying so hard." He paused then, his gaze slowly lifting to hers. His eyes held her in place, not demanding, not pleading, just seeing her. He didn't say it, but the message sat thick in the air between them. "You're my peace." Jewellisa's lips parted, but no words came out. She only nodded slowly, gently. And he smiled, faint and small but real. No confession, no kiss. Just a moment, a bridge between two souls carrying different weights but longing for the same kind of freedom. From that dinner onward, something shifted. They still didn't label what they had, still no mention of surnames, still no late-night love declarations. But the way he looked at her changed, and the way she lingered near him said more than words could. They started spending evenings on his balcony, him with a mug of tea, her with a book, or sometimes nothing at all. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just watched the streetlights or listened to faint city noise. Once she fell asleep while leaning against his shoulder. He didn't move. On campus, people noticed them. Professors would often assign them as partners without even asking. Their classmates whispered about their chemistry, but no one dared question it directly. They weren't loud, they weren't obvious, but they were something undeniable. Jason, who was once a mystery to everyone, had become a gentle presence around her, and Jewellisa, whose beauty was already breathtaking, now walked with a lightness that came only from being seen and understood. One Friday evening, he brought her a book. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with a thin silk ribbon. "For me?" she asked, surprised. "Open it." She unwrapped it and gasped softly. It was a rare biography of a Nigerian female industrialist she once mentioned in passing weeks ago. Jewellisa stared at the cover, stunned. "You remembered?" "I always listen," he said simply. That night, as she curled up in bed with the book on her lap, she didn't read a single word. She just smiled and pressed her palm gently against the cover. Her heart was too full. The following week ushered in a slow, golden spring. London felt warmer, almost softer, like the city itself had become aware of the growing warmth between Jewellisa and Jason. The trees along their street bloomed shyly with pale flowers, and the air carried a lightness that made everything feel possible. By now it had become their tradition evening balcony talks. Their apartment balconies were just 2 floors apart, but they always met at Jason's. It was bigger, cleaner, and had 2 old armchairs he claimed were from a vintage store in Camden. Most evenings they'd bring their drinks, tea for him, fruit smoothies for her, and talk about life, about fear, about what they wanted to become when everything else fell away. "Do you ever feel guilty for wanting something different?" Jewellisa asked one evening as they sat under a slowly darkening sky. Jason raised a brow. "Different from what?" "From what your parents expect, from what your last name requires." He exhaled slowly, watching a bird land on the railing. "All the time," he admitted. "But I also know that if I keep living for everyone else, I'll die piece by piece, quietly." Jewellisa nodded. "I feel that too. Like I was born into this massive world of gold and responsibility, and I'm expected to just step into it. No questions asked. No time to wonder if I want something more." Jason turned to her, his expression soft. "Do you want something more?" She looked up, eyes thoughtful. "I don't know yet, but I want to be allowed to find out." That night, Jason played her one of his saxophone recordings from when he was 18. It was a slow jazz version of Asa's Bibunki. The music was hauntingly beautiful. It wasn't perfect, but it was soulful and raw. "You played like your heart was breaking," she whispered after the last note faded. He smiled almost sadly. It was. And in that moment, she realized how deeply he felt everything, how tightly he held himself together just to move through a world that misunderstood him. Their bond continued to blossom. Jason became a fixture in her days. He helped her with her business strategy presentations, walked her home when the night stretched too late, and once even stayed up with her until 3 a.m. just to proofread her thesis proposal. He never asked for anything in return, never tried to impress her with wealth or charm. He didn't need to. His quiet acts of service spoke volumes. When she mentioned once how much she missed Nigerian hibiscus, he sourced it from a little store in Brixton and left a bottle on her doorstep with a note, "For the homesick heart." Jewellisa felt herself changing. Her walls were still there, but softer now, and it wasn't because she was falling in love blindly, but because she was finally being seen, not for her family name, not for her beauty, but for her mind, her effort, her soul. One Sunday afternoon, while sitting on the grass in Hyde Park, Jason suddenly said, "You know, you're the most disciplined person I've met." She laughed. "That's not very romantic." "It wasn't meant to be. It's meant to be real. You've had everything, yet you've never let it own you." Jewellisa quieted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm allowed to want more than just being the next Mustapha CEO. Like, what if I want love too, and softness, and freedom?" Jason was quiet, then said something that made her heart flutter. "You deserve all of it." She looked at him then, and though he didn't reach for her hand or kiss her, his eyes said everything. That night, after she returned to her apartment, she called her mother. They spoke about school, the weather, and the fashion show Josephine had attended in Abuja. But then Madame Josephine asked gently, "You sound different, Jewy, happier. Are you seeing someone?" Jewelisa's breath caught. She wasn't ready to say yes, but she also couldn't say no. "There's someone," she admitted softly, "but it's early." Her mother's voice was cautious. "Do you know his people?" "Not yet," she said honestly. "Be careful, my darling," Josephine said. "Not everyone who smiles means well." Jewellisa hung up, feeling a strange mix of joy and dread. She wanted to protect what she and Jason were building, but something in her mother's tone reminded her that eventually the truth would have to come out. And when it did, she hoped it wouldn't shatter everything. A week later, Jason invited her to a celebration dinner. He had just defended his final thesis and passed with distinction. He told her he didn't want anything fancy, just a small celebration between the two of them. She wore a soft, off-shoulder maroon dress and let her curls fall freely. When she arrived at the rooftop restaurant in Shoreditch, Jason was already waiting. Black button-up shirt, sleeves rolled, smile boyish and proud. "You look," he started, trailing off as he took in the sight of her. She blushed. "You clean up nicely, too." They toasted with sparkling juice, laughed over grilled tilapia and yam fries, and shared their dreams under fairy lights and a half-moon. Halfway through the night, a slow song played in the background. Johnny Drill's Romeo Juliet. Jason reached out a hand. "Dance with me." They danced, slowly, awkwardly at first, then comfortably. Her head on his chest, his chin brushing the top of her curls. It wasn't a kiss, but it was just as intimate. And that night, when they parted ways at her door, she lingered, wanting to say something, to cross that final line. But she couldn't. Not yet. Because it was no longer just attraction. It was beginning to feel like love. It had started off like any other afternoon. Jason had offered to pick Jewellisa up from campus as usual, but there was something different in his eyes when she walked toward the car. She just wrapped up a study session when Derek, tall, wealthy, and charming, had stopped her with a confident smile and an invitation to dinner. She hadn't even entertained the offer for more than a few seconds. But Jason had seen it, and now they were in his car, the silence between them thick, humming like static. Jewellisa sat stiffly in the passenger seat, glancing at him. His jaw was clenched, fingers gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. The streetlights washed over his face in intervals. Golden light, then shadow, then light again. She cleared her throat softly. "You've been really quiet." He said nothing. "Is everything okay?" She tried again, her voice softer. Jason's hands flexed on the wheel. His eyes stayed on the road. "Why did you let him talk to you?" The question dropped like thunder between them. Jewellisa blinked. "What?" "Derek," he said, still not looking at her. "I saw him. The way he smiled at you. The way he looked like he already had you." She sat up straighter, confused and slightly defensive. "Jason, I didn't let him do anything. He came over and started talking. I said no, politely, and I didn't know you were watching." Jason finally pulled the car to a slow stop at a red light. The city buzzed outside the windshield, but the air inside the car was still. "I've liked you for so long, Jewellisa," he said, voice low and taut, "since before we ever spoke. Back when you were just that girl in the library who made the world look quiet." She turned toward him, her breath catching. "I told myself I wouldn't mess it up, that if I stayed close enough, helped when you needed it, maybe, just maybe, you'd feel something too. I was scared that if I said how I felt, I'd lose whatever we had." Jewellisa's throat was tight. She didn't know what to say. Jason continued, eyes still forward. "But watching another man stand there and speak to you like you were a prize he could just claim? That shattered something in me, and I realized I've been a coward." He turned his head now, finally looked at her. "You're not just someone I admire, Jewellisa. You're the only person in my life who's ever made me feel enough, like I didn't have to perform or impress, like I could just be Jason, not a name, not a son, just me. And that That's everything. She felt something inside her shift, a quiet unraveling. Her hands trembled in her lap. So why didn't you say anything before? She whispered. He leaned back in his seat, exhaling. Because I've never been this afraid of losing something I never even had. The traffic light turned green, but neither of them noticed. Jewellisa reached for his hand across the gear stick. Her fingers curled around his. You could have just told me, she said softly. I've liked you too. For a while now. I was waiting for you to say it. He looked at her, stunned. Then something broke across his face. A flood of relief, emotion, love. He didn't speak. He just reached over slowly, cautiously, like she was something sacred. And then he kissed her. Their first kiss. It was soft, but not hesitant. Deep, but not rushed. His hand cupped her jaw, and her eyes fluttered shut, as warmth bloomed in her chest and spread like fire through her veins. Time seemed to pause, the hum of the engine fading, the traffic lights disappearing, the city becoming silent around them. Jewellisa melted into it. She had never kissed anyone before. Never let someone hold her that way, gently, reverently, like she was a miracle unfolding. When they pulled apart, her breath was shallow. Her fingers still gripped his wrist. Jason searched her face. Was that okay? She gave the softest nod. It was everything. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but wonder. She was a virgin, not just in body, but in love, in intimacy, in what it felt like to be wanted for nothing but her soul. And tonight, in the warmth of that car, in Jason's quiet confession and tender kiss, she realized something startling. She was falling for him. No, she already had. The realization didn't frighten her. It filled her. She wasn't afraid of what it meant. She just knew this, whatever it was between them, was hers. Not because of gold or legacy, but because she had finally found something real. Her first kiss wasn't fireworks. It was peace. The following week arrived like a fever dream, filled with final submissions, sleepless nights, and the heavy pressure of deadlines that squeezed the entire student body into survival mode. Even London's usual buzz dimmed under the weight of finals. Jewellisa powered through it all with a kind of lightness she didn't expect. Because Jason was with her. They still met in the library, but now he'd hold her hand across the desk when the workload got too much. He brought her her favorite pastries before long study sessions and whispered encouragements that made her forget the ache in her eyes. She wore his hoodie now, oversized and warm, like it had always been hers. The kiss they shared in the car had changed everything. The unspoken tension between them had finally bloomed into something sacred and undeniable. He didn't say girlfriend, and she didn't ask, but the way he looked at her said it all. On the day of her last and most dreaded exam, business analytics, Jewellisa woke up before her alarm. She paced, revised, prayed, her nerves tangled like wire in her stomach. This exam wasn't just about grades. It was about proving herself to her professors, to her family, to herself. At 7 a.m. sharp, Jason was at her door. You ready? He asked gently. She gave him a tight nod. On the drive to campus, he kept one hand on the wheel, the other loosely holding hers. I left something in your bag, he said as they pulled into the university lot. She frowned and opened the side zipper of her backpack. A folded note rested inside. You are gold, Jewellisa, pure, strong, rare. Shine loud today. Jay, her throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered, slipping it into her notebook like a talisman. Jason leaned in and kissed her forehead. Go remind them who you are. 3 hours later, she walked out of the exam hall drenched in relief, the kind that soaked into her bones. The sky above was soft and cloudless, and the air felt different, like the world had paused to applaud her for surviving it all. And there he was. Jason stood across the courtyard, leaning on his car, dressed in his favorite black coat and waiting like she was the only person in the world. She ran to him before she realized what her feet were doing. He caught her in a warm, grounding hug. It's over, she breathed into his shoulder. I know, and I'm so proud of you. She pulled back, laughing, giddy with exhaustion. What now? I'm taking you somewhere. Where? It's a surprise. An hour later, she found herself standing in front of a breathtaking rooftop restaurant in Mayfair. Ivy-covered walls, golden lanterns, a view that stretched across London's skyline. Jason had planned it all. Inside, the space was intimate and glowing. A violinist played in the corner, and everything smelled like roses and spice. You didn't have to do all this, she whispered, as they sat at a private table near the edge of the terrace. Yes, I did, he said, eyes never leaving hers. You spent the last 6 months fighting for excellence. Let me give you one night of peace. She smiled. You already gave me that. The meal was divine. Roasted sea bass, saffron rice, perfectly grilled lamb. But she barely remembered the food. What she remembered was how Jason held her gaze as she spoke, how he rested his hand on her knee when she laughed, how she felt like the only girl in the world. Halfway through dessert, the restaurant lights dimmed slightly, and the rooftop filled with soft golden tones. Jason stood and extended a hand. Dance with me, she laughed. You're unbelievable. And yet, you like me. She placed her hand in his and let him lead her to the small space beside their table. There, under the London night sky, they swayed to an instrumental version of Fall in Love by DeBonge, playing softly through hidden speakers. His arms wrapped around her waist, hers looped behind his neck. The world disappeared. There was no Mustapha, no Khalifa, no family empires, no legacies. Just this, her, wrapped in his warmth, her heart thudding against his. She looked up at him. What is this, Jason? She asked softly. He cupped her cheek. It's everything I didn't know I needed. And then he kissed her again. This kiss was different, deeper, slower. It was the kind of kiss that marked the beginning of something real. The kind that left her breathless, not from shock, but from how right it felt. She didn't even notice the tears until they slid down her cheek. He pulled back. Hey, what's wrong? She shook her head, laughing through the tears. Nothing. I've never felt like this before. Not ever. Jason smiled, brushing a thumb across her face. You don't have to rush. We're exactly where we should be. She nodded, pressing her forehead to his. I've never kissed anyone until you. His eyes widened a little, softening. And I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. In that moment, she knew. She was in love. Not just curious or intrigued, but deeply, irrevocably in love with Jason. This wasn't the plan, but this magic, was her truth. It was the Monday after finals, and London felt like a whole new world. The campus was quieter. The pressure had lifted. Laughter echoed through the halls as students celebrated their freedom, their successes, and for some, their survival. Everyone looked lighter, but no one glowed quite like Jewellisa Mustapha. She was in love. The kind of love that wrapped around her gently and didn't ask her to become anyone else. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was undeniable. And it was Jason. Since their kiss on the rooftop, everything between them had changed. Not in a dramatic, whirlwind kind of way, but in the quiet details. He held her hand as they walked to class. She sat with him during lunch breaks, her fingers laced with his under the table. He still brought her flowers, small, thoughtful bunches of daisies or lavender. And when he kissed her now, it was with the softness of someone who knew he had found something sacred. They didn't announce their relationship with a post or a party. They simply lived in it, and those around them began to notice. One afternoon, as Jewellisa sat outside the university cafe, reviewing her research notes, her friend Adesua, a stylish and observant Nigerian girl from the law faculty, slid into the seat across from her. So, you and Jason, she said with a teasing smile. Jewellisa looked up, pretending to be confused. What about us? Adesua rolled her eyes. Please, you two have been orbiting each other like a Nigerian love movie for months, but now you're glowing, babe. What's the gist? Jewellisa chuckled. We're together, finally. Adeswa squealed. Ah, it's about time. He looks at you like you hung the stars. He's different, Jewellisa said, her voice softening. He listens. He makes me feel safe, like I don't have to prove anything. Adeswa leaned in. That's love, babe. Real love. Hold on to that. Jason and Jewellisa began exploring more of London together now that their studies were over. They visited Camden Market, where she laughed as he bartered for art like he was in Lecky. They took a lazy boat ride along the Thames, had deep conversations over gelato in Notting Hill, and on one rainy afternoon, they danced barefoot in their hallway to Burna Boy's On the Low. Their days were filled with the kind of joy that doesn't beg for attention, it simply exists. One evening, after watching a play at the West End, they walked hand in hand through the near-empty streets, the city glimmering around them. Jewellisa stopped in the middle of a quiet crosswalk and looked at him. I don't want this to end. Jason smiled. It won't. Not if we don't let it. I mean, this. Us. London. This season. He cupped her cheek. We'll build new seasons. Together. The very next weekend, Jason surprised her with a visit to Kew Gardens. The air was crisp, the flowers in full bloom. As they walked through a glass house filled with orchids and mist, Jason suddenly pulled her aside to a quiet bench shaded by cascading vines. I have something to ask you, he said, reaching into his coat. Jewellisa blinked. Jason, what? He didn't bring out a ring. He brought out a silver bracelet with a small gold pendant shaped like a flame. Before I ask for forever, he said slowly, I want to ask for now, for the right to be yours, publicly, intentionally. Will you be my girlfriend? Officially? Jewellisa stared at him, stunned. It wasn't what she expected, but somehow it was even better. Simple. Honest. Unforced. She laughed, the sound bursting from her chest. Jason, I've been yours since the day you kissed me in that car. He smiled, eyes full of something deep and wordless, and fastened the bracelet around her wrist. I still wanted to hear you say it. Then yes, she said, grinning. Yes, I'll be yours. And there, in a garden surrounded by butterflies and blooming jasmine, they sealed it with a kiss. Later that night, she journaled in her room for the first time in weeks. Her handwriting was messy from excitement. I said yes, and I meant it. I'm not afraid anymore. I don't know what's coming, but I know what I feel. I've never belonged to anyone before, but now I do. And somehow that feels like freedom. Banana Island had never felt colder. It had only been 2 days since Jewellisa returned to Lagos, but the warmth she carried from London was already being choked by formality, routine, and the unspoken expectations that wrapped around her like a golden cage. The Mustapha mansion gleamed, the staff bowed, and her mother had hugged her tighter than usual. But even in that embrace, she had felt it. The questions, the silent search for clues. And tonight, those questions would find their answers. After dinner, Jewellisa sat in the drawing room with her mother. Madame Josephine looked every inch the queen she was, elegant in a flowing navy caftan, diamond-studded bracelets clinking as she flipped through a luxury wedding catalog. Have you spoken to Adamu's son lately? She asked casually, sipping her tea. He's back from Harvard. Owns 3 estates in Ikoyi now. Jewellisa smiled thinly. I'm not interested in Adamu's son. Josephine raised a brow. Then who are you interested in? Jewellisa hesitated, then reached for her phone and pulled up a picture. Jason, standing by a fountain in Hyde Park, smiling like he'd just told a joke only she would understand. Her mother took the phone, her painted lips already parted to offer a polite compliment, until her eyes locked on his face, and the color drained from hers. The teacup in her hand began to tremble. Who is this? She asked, her voice suddenly sharp. Jewellisa blinked. His name is Jason. Jason K. Well, he never told me his full surname. Josephine looked up, fury building behind her lashes. You don't know his surname? He doesn't know mine either. We wanted things to be real, not based on name or power. Josephine rose from her seat like lightning. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Where did you meet this boy? In London. We were classmates. He's brilliant, kind, quiet. Did he ever mention what his family does? Jewellisa nodded slowly. Petroleum. I think his father owns a company. Josephine staggered back like she'd been slapped. No. Mom! No! The room seemed to constrict. The walls closed in. That boy is a Khalifa, I know that face. He is Khalifa's son. Jewellisa froze. Her phone slipped from her fingers and hit the marble floor with a soft thud. No, it can't be. He said his name was Jason. Jason Adine Khalifa, Josephine hissed. That is his full name. He is the son of Adetokunbo Khalifa, and over my dead body will you ever be with him. By the time Dr. Jewellisa Mustapha entered the room, the house was already shaking with tension. What is going on? He asked coolly. Josephine turned, eyes wild. Your daughter has been sleeping with Khalifa's son. Jewellisa flinched. Mummy, please. Don't mummy me. Do you know what that name means to this family? Do you know the history? The betrayal? Leneth's eyes turned dark, cold, and calculating. Tell me it's not true. Jewellisa stood, voice shaking. I didn't know who he was. We never told each other. We fell in love. Love, her father spat. You call that love? She tried to speak again, but he roared. After everything I've built, after the war I fought with that man, you want to throw it away for his son? I didn't plan this. You don't have the right to feel this way, he said coldly. Not in this house, not under my name. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Daddy, please. If you continue seeing him, Josephine snapped, you are no longer welcome in this house. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then slowly Jewellisa raised her chin. I love him. Leneth stared at her like she was a stranger. Then you're no longer a Mustapha. She crumbled inside, but didn't show it. I'll leave in the morning, she whispered. She walked out. On the other side of the city, in a similarly palatial mansion, surrounded by oil tycoon guards and power-choked air, Jason sat at the family dinner table with his father and mother. So, his father said between bites of peppered snail, I hear you've been seeing someone in London. Jason stiffened. Yes. His mother smiled faintly. Is it serious? Jason looked his father in the eye. Very. What's her name? Jewellisa. Adetokunbo Khalifa's fork dropped. Mustapha? He asked, voice like ice. Jason nodded. The room froze. That girl is Leneth Mustapha's daughter? His mother whispered. Yes. Silence. Then a slow, bitter laugh from his father. After everything that family did to us, you fall in love with his daughter. Jason stood. With respect, sir, she didn't do anything. She didn't even know. Neither of us did. You are my son, Adetokunbo growled. You are a Khalifa. You don't fall in love with the enemy. She's not the enemy, Jason said, voice rising. She's the first peace I've ever known. Then you're a disgrace to this name, his father snapped. Jason's mother whispered something in Yoruba, but her husband waved her off. His voice was steel. If you ever see that girl again, you are not my son. Jason clenched his jaw. His fist trembled. I never asked to be your son, he said quietly. I just asked to be myself. And then he walked out. That night, two hearts broke across Lagos. One in Banana Island, one in Ikoyi. They both stared at their phones. But neither texted. Not yet. Because love, real love, had just entered its first war. Jewellisa sat on the edge of her childhood bed, her eyes swollen from crying, her heart trembling in her chest like it no longer knew how to beat properly. Her room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The moment her mother recognized Jason's face, her entire world had shifted. Her father's threats, her mother's heartbreak, the weight of betrayal she didn't even commit, it all pressed on her like a storm she couldn't run from. She clutched her phone in her hand. She had stared at Jason's contact for hours. And finally, she pressed call. It rang twice. Then, Jewellisa, She didn't wait. You knew, didn't you? You knew and you didn't tell me. Jason, how could you? His voice cracked instantly. I swear to you, Lisa, I didn't know. Not until my parents said it. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know you were a Mustapha. You're a Khalifa, she whispered, broken. Yes, but I'm also Jason. The Jason who held your books, who kissed you in my car, who fell in love with you in the silence of the library before I ever knew your name. She was crying now. They want me to cut you off. My father, he said I'm no longer his daughter. My mother can't even look at me. I know, Jason whispered. Same here. My father threatened to disown me. My mother cried. They think we're poison for each other. She sobbed. Why is this happening to us? What did we do except fall in love? Nothing, he said fiercely. We did nothing wrong. Listen to me. Please, meet me. One last time. Please. Jason, I'm begging you, Jewellisa. Just let me see you. One last time. That's all I need. There was a long silence. Then she whispered, Send the address. The apartment was quiet when she arrived. It was a private space they had rented occasionally during project weeks in London. A place filled with memories. A place they once called neutral ground. Now, it was a battlefield of love and defiance. Jewellisa stepped in, and he was there, standing by the window. He turned the moment she entered, and his whole body seemed to cave with emotion. She was shaking. So was he. And then they broke. I can't breathe without you, Jason whispered, tears falling down his cheeks. I can't think straight. I can't eat. I walk around this city like I'm losing my mind. She sobbed. I wanted a life with you. I was planning it. You're the first man who ever made me feel seen. I don't want to lose that. You won't, he said, walking toward her. You won't. Let them keep their war. I want you, only you. His arms wrapped around her, and she collapsed into him, their bodies trembling from the weight of everything. They kissed like it was the last time, like their love needed to scream against the world that tried to silence it. And then, without words, she led him to the bed. That night, Jewellisa gave herself to Jason, wholly, completely, vulnerably. She didn't hold back. She wasn't afraid. Her heart was already his, and now she gave him her body, her soul, everything in her that mattered. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was sacred. He kissed every inch of her skin like it was holy ground. He touched her with reverence, with passion, with the love of a man who had waited a lifetime for someone to choose him, not for his name, but for his heart. And she let go. Every sigh, every shiver, every stroke became a part of their rebellion. She had never known this kind of connection before, where every kiss felt like a vow, where every gaze into his eyes made her feel more alive than anything she had ever known. He entered her slowly, gently holding her hand, whispering her name like it was the only thing that could save him. And she cried, not from pain, but from the overwhelming emotion of being loved so deeply, of being chosen, of choosing him back. Afterwards, they lay in silence, her head on his chest, their fingers laced together. Jason stroked her arm gently, his voice raw. You're mine, Jewellisa, and I'm yours. Let the world say what it wants. They won't stop, she murmured. They'll try to tear us apart. Then we hold tighter. She looked up at him. I gave you everything tonight. He kissed her forehead. You've given me more than anyone ever has. You gave me peace. You gave me belief. You gave me you. And in that moment, Jewellisa knew. Not even a 30-year feud could break what they had just sealed with flesh, with soul, with love. They were no longer two people in love. They were a force. For 3 long weeks, Jewellisa lived in limbo, between the life she was born into and the life her heart was fighting for. Every day she pleaded with her parents, especially her mother, hoping that somewhere beneath the anger and legacy, there still lived the love that raised her. But the answer was always the same. No. Her father barely spoke to her anymore. When he did, his voice was sharp and laced with betrayal. I will not let you disgrace this family. Dr. Jewellisa Mustapha barked one morning after she brought up Jason again. You speak that name in this house one more time, and you are no longer my daughter. He's not his father, she cried. He's kind, Daddy. He's not like them. Lenneth slammed his hand on the breakfast table. There are lines we do not cross, Jewellisa. This is not about love. This is about power, legacy, betrayal. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't stop. Then take your power. Take your legacy. I don't want it. All I want is him. Meanwhile, across town, Jason was going through his own war. His father had blocked his accounts, removed him from the company's succession plan, and had threatened to cut him off permanently if he didn't end things with Jewellisa. Jason stood firm. I'm not letting her go, he said one night, facing his father across the massive dining table. I'd rather walk away from all of this than lose the one person who sees me. Then you are no longer my son, Adetokunbo said coldly. Jason said nothing, just got up and walked away, because this time he had something worth more than money or power. He had her, but love, even when fierce, does not make life easy. Jewellisa began to unravel slowly. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Her bones ached with exhaustion and stress. She woke up each morning with her heart sinking like lead, and her skin turned pale beneath the warmth of Lagos. Then came Saturday. She didn't rise at all. Her room remained dark, curtains drawn. Her phone rang endlessly. Her breakfast, untouched, sat cold by her bedside. By noon, Madame Josephine burst into the room, panic on her face. Jewellisa! She rushed to her daughter's side. Are you sick? Talk to me. But Jewellisa could barely open her eyes. She hadn't thrown up. She hadn't cried. She had simply shut down. That afternoon, Josephine called their trusted family doctor. Azent, he arrived promptly, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and quiet hands. As he examined her, asked questions, checked her vitals, his expression shifted. Then he asked the question that made Josephine's stomach drop. When was your last period? Jewellisa blinked slowly. I can't remember. The doctor sat back, exhaled, and gently said, She's pregnant. Josephine's hand flew to her mouth. What? She's around 5 or 6 weeks along, he said carefully. Her vitals are okay, but the emotional strain is affecting her energy levels. Jewellisa's mother stared at her daughter, her beautiful, broken daughter, now carrying the child of the man their family hated most. Later that night, her father stormed into her room, fury in every step. You're pregnant, he spat, his voice low and trembling with rage. You are carrying a Khalifa. Jewellisa sat up in bed, her hands resting over her abdomen protectively. Yes. You're getting rid of it, he said. Tomorrow. I'll call the doctor myself. She looked him dead in the eye. No. This isn't a negotiation, Jewellisa. I said no, she shouted. I'd rather die than take this child out of me. I'd rather disappear. Run away. You'll never see me again. I'll leave with Jason, and we'll build our own life far away from all of this hatred. Her father's face turned pale. He stared at her, not as his daughter, but as someone unrecognizable. I gave you everything, he whispered. And I gave you loyalty, she said softly, her voice trembling, until you asked me to choose between love and control. Josephine stood in the doorway, silent tears running down her face. Lenneth turned and walked out. That evening, Jason got the call. She didn't even say hello, just whispered, Jason, I'm pregnant. His heart stopped. The world spun. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. But then it all made sense. She had given herself to him fully, tenderly, without fear, and now life had responded. You're carrying my child? He said, awe in his voice. Yes. He sat down slowly, pressing a hand over his mouth. He had been loved before, but never like that. He had been touched before, but never with reverence. She was the first woman to break down every wall inside him, and now she was carrying his child. Jason's voice was hoarse when he spoke again. I'm going to fight, Lisa. For you, for our baby, for the life we've started. I don't care what it cost me. I won't let them break us." And neither of them noticed it. But for the first time in weeks, they both exhaled. Because now it wasn't just about them. It was about legacy, but not the kind their families had fought for. This was a new legacy, one born from love. The house had never been this quiet. Madame Josephine Mustapha sat by the wide bay window of her private lounge, a silk robe wrapped tightly around her frame, her fingers lightly tracing the rim of her untouched glass of wine. Outside, the sea beyond Banana Island crashed softly against the coast. But inside, her thoughts were a storm that refused to settle. Her daughter was pregnant. And not just pregnant by a Khalifa. For 30 years, the Mustaphas and the Khalifas had drawn blood from each other in the battlefield of business. Disputed lands, bribed officials, slandered names. It was all about dominance, power, legacy. And yet, in the most ironic twist of fate, love had bloomed between the two houses. Sweet, unfiltered, innocent love. And it had chosen their daughter as its vessel. Josephine leaned back and shut her eyes. She thought of Jewellisa as a baby, her tiny hands gripping Josephine's finger. She thought of her in primary school, refusing to use her driver because other kids didn't have one. She thought of her growing up, always kind, always grounded, never one to chase status or attention. Her daughter was extraordinary. And now her daughter was breaking. Josephine had watched her fade for weeks, watched her try to stay strong, try to beg for a blessing they would never give. She had seen the hope die in Jewellisa's eyes a little more every day. Until that morning. Josephine had walked in on her daughter standing before the mirror, cradling her belly, not in fear but in love. That image had changed something. That's when Josephine made her decision. She wasn't just a Mustapha. She was a mother. At dinner that night, Lenneth was stoic as usual, flipping through financial reports and sipping his scotch like the world around him wasn't falling apart. Josephine watched him for a long time before speaking. "We need to talk." He didn't look up. "If this is about that boy..." "It is," she cut in, voice calm but firm. "And about our daughter." He sighed. "I'm done talking, Josephine. I've made my decision. If she keeps that child, she's no longer a Mustapha." "You want to disown your only child because she fell in love?" Josephine asked quietly. "Because she crossed a line?" "No," Josephine said. "She healed a wound we refused to admit existed." Lenneth's hand froze mid-page. "She is not betraying us," she continued. "She is trying to build something better, something real, something you and I never had the courage to do. Choose love over legacy." He looked up now, slowly. "You've always been emotional about these things." "I've always been a mother," she said. "You fell in love with me before I became your strategic wife. Do you remember that?" He didn't speak. Josephine stepped forward. "I'm choosing her. I am standing by her, by our grandchild, whether you do or not." And then she said it, the one thing she'd never dared speak in their entire marriage. "If you force her to choose between love and blood, you will lose her, and you will lose me too." Meanwhile, on the other side of Lagos, Jason stood at the gates of his father's estate, fists clenched at his sides. He had tried everything, emails, letters, speaking to his mother. No response. Tonight, he came to speak face to face. The guards hesitated, then let him through. He found Adetokunbo Khalifa in his home office. As expected, surrounded by strategy boards and political connections and dusty portraits of his own father's empire. The smell of power was thick in the air. "You have 10 minutes, his father said without looking up. Jason stood tall. "That's all I need." He walked forward slowly. "I'm not here to ask for permission," he said. "I'm here to speak as your son, one last time." His father looked up now. "She's pregnant," Jason said. Adetokunbo's eyes widened. "You fool!" Jason stepped closer. "No, I am finally a man, and I am in love with a woman who made me believe I'm more than your shadow. We created a life, and I will not run from it." You'll raise a Mustapha child? His father spat. You'll mix blood with the enemy? Jason didn't flinch. No, I will raise my child with the woman I love. You can keep your empire, your oil, your hatred, but I will not let you raise my child in the same coldness you raised me. His father's eyes burned. If you walk out that door, I already did. And with that, Jason turned and walked away. That night, Josephine sat beside Jewellisa in her bedroom, stroking her hair like she used to when she was little. You'll be okay, baby, she whispered. Jewellisa looked at her, eyes wet. Are you sure? Josephine smiled sadly. No, but I'm here, and I will fight for you now. I promise. And miles away, Jason stared at the ceiling of his small rented flat and made his own vow. They won't stop us. Not now. Not ever. Because now they weren't just fighting for love. They were fighting for a future. For 2 days, Dr. Jewellisa Mustapha didn't speak to anyone. He barely ate, barely slept. He sat alone in his private study, surrounded by century-old gold contracts, maps of global mining routes, and the quiet ticking of the Mustapha grandfather clock. His empire, once his greatest pride, suddenly felt cold. His wife had chosen their daughter, and so had his heart. But his pride, his legacy, his past, it wouldn't let go without a fight. Then came Sunday morning, and with it, a box. Josephine walked in and placed it on his desk without a word. Lyneth stared at it for a long time, then slowly removed the lid. Inside were letters. Old, yellowed, handwritten letters from a time before titles and power. Back when he was just a young, ambitious man with dirt on his shoes and fire in his belly. They were from Jason Khalifa, his former best friend. Before the feud, before the betrayal, before the war, they had started their businesses together, young and wide-eyed, two brilliant Nigerian men with dreams bigger than the continent. Lyneth in gold, Adekunbo in oil. They built together, traveled together, married within months of each other. Then it happened. An overseas deal gone wrong. A contract Lyneth had worked years on, swept from under him by a silent investor. That investor had been Adekunbo. The betrayal gutted him. The media turned it into scandal. The business world whispered of deception and greed. Their friendship shattered overnight. But what the world didn't know was that Adekunbo had come to his door that very night, with tears, with apologies, with explanations Lyneth refused to hear. I never meant for it to happen this way, the letter read. You were my brother, Len. I didn't steal from you. I tried to protect the deal. I lost control. I tried to fix it. You never let me. Lyneth sat back, breath shaking. His hands trembled. All these years, he'd held on to a truth he never truly confirmed. And now, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was his daughter, his legacy, not in gold, but in flesh and blood. That evening, he found Josephine in the garden. She looked up when she saw him, prepared for another fight, but he simply sat beside her. And for the first time in weeks, he spoke with no anger. I never told you what really happened. She stayed quiet. He exhaled. Adekunbo didn't steal from me. Not exactly, I just couldn't face being wrong. I was so focused on my empire, my reputation. And I lost my brother. Then I made everyone else my enemy. I turned love into war. Josephine said nothing. Then he added quietly, we're going to be grandparents. She turned to him, eyes wide. And for the first time, he smiled. 2 days later, he made a call. Not to Jason, but to Adekunbo. The line rang once, twice. Then a voice, cold, tired. Lyneth. There was a pause. I have a daughter, Lyneth said softly. You have a son, and they're in love. A longer pause. They're having a child. Oh, silence. Lyneth cleared his throat. I don't want to be the reason my grandson grows up without peace. We've both won, we've both lost. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to bury this. Adetokunbo said nothing. Then finally, I'll send my driver. That Friday, in a quiet villa just outside Lagos, two of Nigeria's most feared and respected men sat across from each other for the first time in over 3 decades. No cameras, no press, just truth, and the love of two young people who had dared to defy legacy. By sunset, they both stepped outside to find Jewellisa and Jason waiting, standing beside each other like they'd stood through every storm. Jason tensed when he saw his father. Jewellisa gripped his hand tighter when she saw hers. But then, Lenneth stepped forward and placed his hand on Jason's shoulder. "I hear you've been taking care of my daughter," he said. Jason nodded. "I love her, sir." Lenneth looked at him for a long moment. "Then you better keep doing it." Behind him, Adetokunbo placed a protective hand on Jewellisa's arm. "You've got fire in you, girl," he said. "I can respect that." And then, as if the universe had sighed with relief, Josephine stepped forward and whispered, "So we're agreed?" Lenneth nodded. "The feud ends here." Adetokunbo extended a hand, and for the first time in 30 years, Lenneth took it. Jewellisa broke into tears. Jason held her. Because somehow, love had done what power never could. It had ended the war. It had been 3 weeks since the war ended, and yet every morning still felt like a dream to Jewellisa. The tension had lifted from her chest. Her parents no longer walked past her in silence. Her father had even begun asking about her cravings, softly, awkwardly, but with effort. Her mother now smiled every time she saw her touching her belly. And Jason? Jason had become a constant. He visited every day, sometimes to bring fruit, sometimes to just hold her hand while they sat under the mango tree in the Mustapha garden and dreamed aloud about a future they were no longer forced to imagine in secret. They had made it. But Jason had one more promise to make, and he wanted the world to hear it. He started planning it with Josephine. She was delighted to help. They chose a private botanical garden on the outskirts of Lagos, a place Jewellisa had once said felt like something out of a storybook, with weeping willows, marble statues, and fountains that sang in the breeze. Jason rented the entire place for the evening. He sent a message to Jewellisa that morning. "Wear white, no questions." When she arrived, guided by her mother's driver, she stepped into a world that took her breath away. The garden glowed with warm lanterns, petals lined the path, and everywhere, from the trees to the glassy fountain, hung soft golden lights that twinkled like stars had descended just for her. Jason stood at the end of the path, dressed in a sleek cream suit, no tie, just him, waiting. Her dress flowed around her like a whisper. He couldn't breathe when he saw her. When she reached him, she opened her mouth to speak, but he shook his head gently, pulling her close. "Not yet," he said, voice quiet with emotion. He led her into the center of the garden, where a single table was set beneath a canopy of jasmine and fairy lights. A violinist stood off to the side, playing their favorite love song from London, the same one they danced to on the rooftop after finals. Dinner was light, barely touched. They were both too overwhelmed, too full already, with memories, with gratitude, with dreams. And then, just as the sun kissed the horizon, Jason stood. Jewellisa looked up. He reached into his inner pocket, not with nervousness, but with conviction. And then he went down on one knee. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Jewellisa Mustapha," he began, voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "You walked into my life with a backpack, a notebook, and a kind of beauty I thought only existed in poems. I was silent for months, afraid, unsure, but you saw me. You loved me not for my name, but for my soul." Tears slid down her cheeks. "You gave me peace when I didn't know I needed it. You gave me a future when I didn't think I deserved one. And now, you're giving me a child, a piece of us." He pulled out a gold ring shaped like a delicate flame. "Let me give you forever. Not just as the mother of my child, but as my wife. Will you marry me?" Jewellisa dropped to her knees, both hands cradling his face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Jason, 1,000 times. Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and then they kissed, slow and reverent, as the garden glowed around them. The violin played louder now. From a distance, their families emerged silently, Josephine holding Lenneth's arm, Adetokunbo and Jason's mother standing side by side. They had kept their distance, letting the moment be theirs. Because this wasn't about them anymore. It was about two hearts that had dared to love past legacy. That night, under the stars, Jason whispered into her ear as they swayed to music only they could hear. "You didn't just change my life, Jewellisa. You saved it." And she held him tighter, because she knew this was their beginning, and nothing would ever come between them again. The Mustapha estate had never seen a day like this. Every corner of the mansion grounds shimmered with elegance. White roses curled around golden arches, glass chandeliers dangled from tall, silk-draped poles, and the scent of jasmine and vanilla wafted gently through the air. The aisles sparkled with soft petals in ivory and bronze, and in the distance the Atlantic Ocean whispered in rhythm, as if blessing the occasion. It was the wedding of the century. And yet, for those who knew the full story, for those who had witnessed war turn to peace, it wasn't just a celebration. It was a rebirth. Guests arrived in waves. Nigeria's elite, business magnates, global partners, and, perhaps the biggest miracle of all, both the Mustaphas and the Khalifas seated side by side, dressed in regal attire. Jewellisa Mustapha wore a gold agbador stitched with delicate embroidery. Beside him, Josephine shimmered in champagne lace, her smile soft but proud. Adetokunbo Khalifa, stoic, quiet, but undeniably present, stood with his wife, his hand resting lightly on her back. For the first time in decades, the tension had left his shoulders. It had taken everything, but today, it was worth it. And then came Jason, tall, striking, calm. His cream caftan was threaded with bronze flames along the sleeves, a nod to the fire he had once walked through. His groomsmen, a mix of old friends and new family, stood proudly behind him. Jason looked toward the aisle, and time stopped, because Jewellisa appeared. Draped in layers of soft gold and pearl, her dress flowed like liquid sunlight, her belly now softly visible beneath the lace. She carried her child with grace and her love with power. Her veil was sheer, her curls adorned with crystals, and her smile, steady, beautiful, and unafraid. The entire crowd rose to its feet. Jason's breath caught. She walked slowly, arm in arm with her father. Lenneth's eyes were damp. The man who once threatened to disown her was now walking her toward her forever. And when he placed her hand into Jason's, he looked the young man in the eye and said, "Take care of her. Take care of them both." Jason nodded. "With my life, sir." The ceremony was simple. Jason and Jewellisa stood beneath a white arch woven with gold leaves and flame lilies. The officiant spoke gently about forgiveness, legacy, and the rare kind of love that rewrites destinies. Then came the vows. Jason's voice shook only once. "When I first saw you, I didn't know your name. I didn't know your story. But I knew you were meant to change mine. You taught me that love doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for courage. And I promise to be courageous every day for you and for the child we've created from that love." Jewellisa wiped a tear and spoke. "You taught me that legacy isn't built in gold or oil. It's built in kindness, in choosing someone again and again, no matter the fire around you. I choose you, Jason Khalifa, yesterday, today, and forever." When the words were spoken, when the rings were exchanged, and when their lips met for the first time as husband and wife, the crowd rose, clapping, weeping, celebrating. The flame had become gold. The feud had become family. At the reception, speeches flowed like fine wine. Josephine spoke of strength. Adetokunbo spoke of second chances. Lenneth finally stood at the mic and cleared his throat. The room hushed. "For years I built walls to protect what I loved. But my daughter showed me that sometimes love is meant to break walls. And now, with pride in my heart, I welcome Jason as my son, and their unborn child as the legacy I never knew I needed." Tears filled every eye. Jason reached for Jewellisa's hand. She squeezed it. That night, under a sky glittering with stars, they shared their first dance as husband and wife. No cameras, no press, just them, her head on his shoulder, his hand over the life growing inside her. And as they swayed to the soft strings of their favorite melody, the crowd disappeared, because they had won. Not just the war, but their future, together. The sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a sleek, modern penthouse nestled in the heart of Ikoyi, Lagos. Warm light danced across the white and gold accents of the living room, where toys were scattered like confetti, and the faint sound of laughter echoed from the balcony. Jewellisa Khalifa, barefoot, radiant, enwrapped in a silk robe, sat on the plush sofa, gently rocking a giggling baby girl in her arms. Her name was Amina Leneth Khalifa, and at 6 months old, she already had her father's eyes and her mother's fire. She cooed, waved her chubby arms, and clutched at the strings on her mother's robe. "Easy, little lady," Jewellisa whispered, smiling down at her daughter. "You're going to be president someday, but for now, let Mama enjoy her coffee." Across the room, Jason walked in carrying 2 mugs, one for him, black and strong, one for her, honey and creamy, just the way she liked. He bent to kiss her cheek, then dropped a gentle kiss on Amina's forehead. "She let you sleep?" he asked, setting the mugs down. "Almost," Jewellisa said with a smirk. "She was dreaming about world domination again." Jason chuckled and lifted their daughter into his arms, effortlessly settling her against his chest. "You're dangerous," he told Amina. "You get that from your mother." "Excuse me," Jewellisa said playfully. Jason winked. "You ruined my whole life, remember? And built you a better one," she said softly. He kissed her lips. Life hadn't just changed. It had bloomed. Their families had finally found peace. Leneth and Adetokunbo were not best friends, but they now sat at the same table, discussed joint ventures, and co-sponsored a new Gold Petroleum Youth Foundation to raise future African entrepreneurs. Josephine had become a doting grandmother, often stealing Amina for weekends filled with lullabies and designer baby clothes. Jason had opened his own consultancy firm, focused on sustainable energy solutions, independent of his father's empire. And Jewellisa had begun shadowing her father at Mustapha Holdings. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Her own vision of legacy was different, feminine, fierce, and full of compassion. That afternoon, they visited the Mustapha estate. It was Amina's naming anniversary, and the gardens had been transformed into a lush celebration of white florals, gold accents, and soft music. Close friends, family, and dignitaries filled the space with warmth. Leneth stood beside Josephine, holding his granddaughter proudly for the first time in public. "She's a Mustapha through and through," he said. Jason smiled. "She's a Khalifa too." The 2 men exchanged a glance, neither willing to concede, both knowing it didn't matter. Because the future didn't belong to either one of them. It belonged to her, to Amina, to the love that had broken the rules and rewritten a dynasty. Later that night, as the last guest left and the sky burned orange over the Lagos skyline, Jason pulled Jewellisa close as they stood by the balcony. "Did you ever imagine it would look like this?" he asked. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I imagined loving you. I just didn't think we'd have to fight so hard for it." He held her tighter. "It was worth every battle." She smiled up at him. "This is just the beginning, you know." "I know," he said, "but whatever comes next, we walk it together." They kissed, soft and slow, and behind them, their daughter slept peacefully. Unaware of the war her love had ended. Dear viewers, what lesson did you take away from this dramatic tale? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.